Don't you dare lay your dirty hands on that medical card. You people keep slipping into this private clinic like stray alley cats looking for a warm place to hide from the rain.
Evelyn Thorne snatched the titanium VIP credential straight from the girl's trembling fingers, her movements sharp, deliberate, and dripping with raw contempt. She immediately pulled a pre-moistened antiseptic wipe from a dispenser beneath the marble counter, meticulously cleaning her latex gloves as if she had just touched something deeply contaminated. You people keep slipping into this private clinic like stray alley cats looking for a warm place to hide from the rain. Evelyn stepped closer, the overhead fluorescent lights reflecting off her sterile, expensive glasses as her lips curled into a practiced sneer. Block C is the community clinic around the back of the complex. That is where charity cases receive their evaluations. Not here. The young woman stood perfectly still, her knuckles turning white as she gripped the straps of her sword backpack. Mom, I am a fully admitted clinical resident, and my entry credentials were clear. Evelyn let out a short, dry laugh that sounded like a dry branch snapping under a heavy boot. Admitted with what exactly? People from your neighborhood do not possess the cognitive capacity for neurosurgery, let alone the funds to stand in this corridor. Now get out of my lobby before your presence compromises the comfort of our actual stakeholders. The girl said absolutely nothing, her jaw locked in a silent, agonizing battle against her own rising tears. But directly behind her, a tall, heavily built African-American man stopped mid-sentence, his briefcase frozen in his right hand. His skin was deep, midnight black, carrying the unmistakable, weathered texture of a man who had survived things this pristine clinic could never comprehend. He stared at the back of the girl's head, his dark eyes darkening further as a dangerous, absolute silence settled over his entire frame. It was his daughter. Evelyn Thorne had no idea who he was. She had no idea that the silent man in the khaki jacket possessed the power to dismantle her entire career with a single phone call. She thought he was just another intruder. What she did next was about to turn her comfortable, high society life completely upside down, triggering a sequence of events that would echo through the federal court system for years to come. Let me tell you about the man who stood in that doorway. Elijah Vance did not inherit a single penny, a single connection, or a single drop of privilege. He grew up in the bleakest corridors of South Side Chicago, a place where the concrete was permanently stained, and the winter wind cut through cardboard boot soles like a razor blade. His mother worked 16-hour shifts as a laundry attendant at a county hospital, breathing in bleach fumes for 24 years just to keep a roof over their heads. They lived in a basement apartment where the radiator clanked all night and the air smelled faintly of damp earth and cheap tobacco. His older brother, Marcus, was the bright light of the family. Everyone in the neighborhood knew it. Marcus could dismantle a broken television and fix it before dinner, his mind sharp as polished flint. He dreamed of becoming a diagnostic physician, of wearing a clean white coat that never smelled like industrial detergent. He had the grades, he had the drive, but he ran out of time. Marcus collapsed on the playground at age 14, his lungs filling with fluid from an undiagnosed heart defect that a simple ultrasound could have caught. The county clinic had a 6-month waiting list for uninsured families. Marcus died in a crowded waiting room 3 days before his appointment. Elijah was 11 years old. He remembers standing in that gray corridor, watching the exhausted nurses roll a gurney away and asking a question that would define every waking hour of his remaining life. Why did nobody look sooner? That question became a burning fire in his chest. At 18, Elijah did not apply for student loans he could never repay. He walked into a recruitment office and enlisted in the United States Marine Corps as a combat medic. He spent 6 years deploying into the dust of Fallujah, carrying wounded men through mortar fire, earning a jagged shrapnel scar across his left shoulder blade that he never speaks about to this day. When his service ended, he used the GI Bill to enter Harvard Medical School, graduating top of his class before moving to a tiny, unheated workshop in Richmond, Virginia. With a single folding table, a refurbished centrifuge, and a desperate obsession with neurotechnological repair, he built Vance Neurotech from nothing. Today, that company sits on the New York Stock Exchange with a $5.8 billion market capitalization. It employs over 400 elite scientists and holds 32 patents on neural implants that have already restored movement to thousands of paralyzed individuals across the globe. Elijah Vance built every single inch of that empire with his bare, calloused hands, driven by the memory of a dead brother whose name was permanently etched into his soul. 2 years ago, his world cracked again when his wife, Sarah, suffered a massive brain aneurysm in their kitchen. By the time the private medical chopper arrived, her heart had stopped. After the burial, Elijah could no longer bear the silence of their large estate. He sold the property, packed up their belongings, and focused everything he had left on their 19-year-old daughter, Maya. Maya was the quiet mirror of her father, possessing an SAT score in the top 1% and a published paper on synaptic regeneration before she even received her high school diploma. She had earned her residency at the prestigious Sterling Clinic entirely on her own merit, using her mother's maiden name on her application documents. But Maya carried a massive secret that she refused to share with her peers on campus. Her father was not just a successful doctor. He was the single largest potential donor in the university's history. For 5 months, the Vance Foundation had been drafting a $15 million endowment contract to construct a state-of-the-art neurological research facility at Sterling, named in honor of Sarah Vance. Maya had begged her father to remain anonymous, wanting to prove she belonged in those operating rooms because of her intellect, not because of a billionaire safety net. So she kept her mouth shut, even when Evelyn Thorne began targeting her during her very first week of clinical rounds. She swallowed the bitterness alone, determined to survive the prejudice on her own terms. She never anticipated that on this specific Tuesday morning, her father would walk through those doors ahead of schedule. Evelyn Thorne's morning started at precisely 5:30 a.m. in her 5-bedroom colonial mansion in the historic district of Richmond, Virginia. She spent 45 minutes selecting a cream-colored silk blouse and a double strand of Akoya pearls, items carefully chosen to project effortless administrative authority and absolute class purity. Her entire 22-year career at Sterling Clinic was built on maintaining an illusion of sterile perfection, a sanctuary where only elite families with generational wealth could access cutting-edge neurological care. To her, medicine was not a calling of mercy, it was a luxury brand. On that exact same Tuesday morning, Maya Vance woke up at 4:15 a.m. in her modest, off-campus apartment that she shared with 2 other clinical students. She spent her first hour reading a 72-page treatise on microvascular anastomosis while drinking black coffee from a chipped ceramic mug. Her hands did not shake as she practiced microsutures on a synthetic silicone membrane, her movements precise and calm under the dim light of a cheap desk lamp. She did not wear designer labels or expensive perfumes, choosing instead a plain gray hoodie and a pair of worn-out denim jeans. She possessed an inner quiet. It was her armor. For the past 4 weeks, Evelyn had watched Maya with a growing sense of irritation that bordered on obsession. She despised the way the young black woman walked through the marble corridors with a quiet, unbothered dignity that could not be bought or intimidated. She hated that Maya's clinical assessments of complex temporal lobe epilepsy cases were more accurate than those of the third-year residents from Yale and Princeton. To Evelyn, a girl who looked like Maya belonged in the supply room or the billing department, not presenting cases to the chief neurosurgeon. She needed to be put in her place. By 8:30 a.m., the atmosphere inside the executive wing of Sterling Clinic was buzzing with anticipation. The board of directors was preparing for a high-stakes, closed-door meeting to finalize a massive $15 million structural expansion project. Evelyn had spent 3 weeks preparing a presentation to secure her promotion to Director of Clinical Operations, a position that came with a $280,000 annual salary and a seat on the executive board. She adjusted her pearls in the reflection of the glass door, confident that her sterile kingdom was perfectly secure. She was ready to reign. At exactly 11:45 a.m., Maya entered the main reception area of the VIP pavilion to submit her weekly clinical residency log. She approached the registration desk, where Evelyn was reviewing a stack of patient admission records. The air in the lobby was thick with the scent of fresh orchids and expensive leather upholstery, a quiet sanctuary of wealth. Maya placed her titanium resident card on the counter, expecting a routine verification process. She stepped forward with her shoulders square, holding the thin plastic folder that contained her evaluated reports. Her breathing was steady, synchronized with the rhythmic ticking of the mahogany grandfather clock in the corner. She did not raise her eyes to meet the icy glare of the woman behind the desk. Silence was her superpower. Evelyn did not look at the card first. She looked at Maya's worn sneakers, then at the faded denim of her jeans, and finally at the deep brown of her skin. The distaste on Evelyn's face was instantaneous, a physical reaction, as if a foul odor had suddenly entered the pristine, climate-controlled lobby. She slid the titanium card toward herself with the very tip of her pen, refusing to make direct contact with it. "This card is registered to the Vance estate." Maya looked up, her expression calm and neutral. "Yes, ma'am. It is my administrative credential for the research wing." Evelyn's eyes narrowed into tiny slits of cold steel. The Vance estate is the primary benefactor of this institution, representing a level of societal contribution that people like you cannot even begin to comprehend. This card was clearly misplaced, or perhaps you found it in one of the laboratory lockers during your cleaning shift. I am confiscating it immediately. Maya felt her heart rate elevate, but she kept her voice perfectly level, refusing to give Evelyn the satisfaction of a reaction. "I am Maya Vance, a registered resident under Dr. Pendleton. Please look at the digital registry on your monitor." Evelyn did not touch her keyboard. She did not check the database. She simply leaned forward, her voice dropping to a harsh whisper that carried clearly across the quiet lobby. "I do not need a computer to tell me who belongs in this pavilion and who does not. People like you enter through the basement loading dock, not the front doors of the Sterling VIP wing. You will hand over your bag for inspection, or I will have campus security escort you out in handcuffs." Directly behind Maya, the heavy glass doors of the pavilion slid open with a soft hiss. Elijah Vance stepped into the lobby, his leather briefcase in hand, his eyes scanning the space for his daughter. He had completed his executive board meeting 20 minutes early and wanted to surprise her. Instead, the first words that reached his ears were the venomous threats of Evelyn Thorne. He stopped dead in his tracks. Elijah Vance took 3 slow, measured steps toward the polished marble counter, his heavy leather boots making absolutely no sound on the pristine imported Italian tiling. His breathing remained perfectly synchronized with his heartbeat, a disciplined habit forged during his years in the military. He stood just behind his daughter, his towering 6'3" frame, casting a long, commanding shadow over the reception desk. The storm had arrived. Evelyn Thorne did not even blink at his approach, her eyes scanning his faded khaki jacket and rugged jeans with immediate, deep-seated disdain. She assumed he was a courier, or perhaps a maintenance worker who had taken the wrong elevator up from the basement. 2 wealthy patients, a couple dressed in designer tennis attire, watched the scene from the plush leather armchairs in the corner, whispering behind their gold-trimmed sunglasses. A young medical intern standing nearby quickly looked down at his tablet, pretending to be deeply engrossed in a patient's chart to avoid getting involved in the unfolding drama. The silence of the bystanders was deafening. Evelyn crossed her arms, leaning slightly against the high marble counter, as if she owned every square inch of the clinic. "Sir, this is the VIP clinical pavilion, and we do not permit unauthorized deliveries or maintenance staff in this lobby. If you are here to pick up biohazard waste, the loading dock is located at the rear of the building, next to the dumpsters. This space is reserved exclusively for paying clientele who contribute to the prestige of our medical community," she sneered. Elijah did not raise his voice. He did not blink, nor did his expression betray the intense, cold fury rising inside his chest. "I am not here for a delivery, and I am certainly not here to be redirected by you. I am Maya's father, and I would like to know why you are confiscating her credential." His voice was incredibly calm, possessing the steady, dangerous weight of a man who had faced down armed insurgents in the desert. Evelyn let out another short, mocking laugh, her fingers tapping rhythmically against the marble. Her performance was deliberate, designed to assert her absolute authority in front of the wealthy onlookers, who were now watching with mild amusement. A father. Well, that certainly explains the lack of basic etiquette and the total disregard for our institutional policies. This young lady attempted to bypass our security protocols using a restricted titanium card that belongs to a major benefactor. I have been the director of admissions at this clinic for 22 years, and I know exactly what our elite patrons look like. She paused. They do not look like you. The words cut through the quiet lobby like a cold blade, leaving a suffocating silence in their wake. The wealthy couple in the corner smirked, the husband nodding in silent agreement with Evelyn's blatant prejudice. The young intern took another step back, completely freezing in fear of losing his prestigious residency if he spoke up against his supervisor. Evelyn felt completely vindicated, her chest swelling with the arrogant belief that she was simply protecting the high standards of her pristine sanctuary. Maya reached out and gently touched her father's forearm, her fingers trembling slightly. "Dad, please, let's just leave. We can resolve this with Dr. Pendleton later." She hated the shame of being humiliated in public, hated that her father had to witness her being stripped of her dignity in the very building he was planning to fund. Elijah placed his large warm hand over hers, his touch immediately steadying her breathing. "No, Maya, we are not leaving." He looked directly into Evelyn Thorne's cold, arrogant eyes, his gaze completely unwavering. "I want your full name, your exact title, and the name of the administrative supervisor who authorized you to make racial profile judgments at this desk." Evelyn's smile vanished, replaced by an ugly, venomous glare that distorted her expensive features. "You do not dictate terms to me in my own facility." Her voice climbed higher, deliberately echoing through the glass atrium. "I am Evelyn Thorne, the supreme administrative authority in this pavilion. If you do not remove yourself and your daughter from this property immediately, I will have campus security arrest you both for criminal trespassing and attempted fraud." She reached under the desk and pressed the red emergency button, her eyes shining with malicious triumph. The trap was set. Within 40 seconds, the heavy double doors of the VIP pavilion swung open with a sharp, metallic click. Officer Brenda Hayes marched into the lobby, her hand instinctively resting near the heavy radio on her utility belt, her eyes scanning the room with trained precision. Directly behind her was a younger officer, Marcus Grayson, whose tense jaw and rigid posture betrayed his complete lack of experience in high-stakes situations. They immediately took in the scene. The towering, midnight black man standing completely still, the young girl clutching her sword backpack, and Evelyn Thorne pointing a trembling, gloved finger. Evelyn did not wait for the officers to ask a single question, her voice immediately slicing through the quiet air with theatrical panic. "Officers, thank goodness you arrived before this situation escalated into physical violence. This unidentified man bypassed our security gates, verbally harassed my staff, and attempted to steal restricted administrative property. I want him handcuffed and removed from these premises immediately to ensure the safety of our patients." Officer Hayes, an 11-year veteran of the campus security force, did not move toward her handcuffs. She looked closely at Elijah Vance, noting his absolute lack of aggressive posturing, his open hands held calmly at his sides, and the deep, unshakable pool of quiet in his dark eyes. She had diffused hundreds of campus disputes, dealt with intoxicated trust fund students, and handled genuine security threats. This did not look like a threat. This felt like a setup. "Sir, I need you to step away from the counter and show me some identification, please," Hayes said, her voice carrying a measured, neutral tone that did not take sides. Elijah did not hesitate, nor did he make any sudden, threatening movements that could give the younger officer an excuse to reach for his holster. He slowly slid his hand into the inner pocket of his khaki jacket, retrieved his leather wallet, and handed his driver's license to the officer without saying a single word. Hayes ran the name through her shoulder radio, her eyes widening slightly as the dispatcher's voice cracked back with a completely clean record. "No warrants, no prior arrests. Not even a single outstanding parking ticket in the Richmond Municipal Database." "He is completely clear, Evelyn," Hayes said, turning to the director with a subtle frown of warning. Evelyn's face flushed a deep, ugly crimson under her expensive foundation, her hands clenching into tight fists. "A clean record means absolutely nothing in this neighborhood. Look at him. Look at what he is wearing, and tell me he belongs in a multi-million-dollar clinical facility. I saw him reach across the counter earlier, and I have reason to believe he has stolen clinical documents inside that leather briefcase. I demand that you search his personal effects right now." Hayes looked visibly uncomfortable, her eyes darting between the security cameras overhead and the dozen of students who had begun gathering near the glass entrance, their phones already raised to record. "Sir, do you consent to a search of your bag?" Elijah looked directly into Hayes's eyes, his voice dropping to a low, resonant frequency that carried the absolute weight of constitutional law. "No, officer, I do not consent to any search. There is no probable cause, there is no active warrant, and this briefcase is my private property." He stood his ground. Evelyn Thorne could not contain her fury any longer, her 22 years of unquestioned authority in this clinic completely blinding her to the legal boundaries of her actions. She had never once been defied by someone who looked like Elijah Vance. In a sudden, reckless movement, she lunged around the side of the marble counter, her hands grabbing the heavy leather strap of Elijah's briefcase and tearing it violently off his shoulder. The rough leather strap burned a red line across his collarbone, but Elijah did not flinch, did not strike back, and did not utter a single curse. Maya cried out in horror, and Officer Hayes stepped forward with her hands raised, but it was already too late. Evelyn slammed the briefcase onto the stainless steel counter, her manicured fingers ripping the brass zipper open with a screeching sound that echoed like a scream through the glass atrium. She began pulling his belongings out, throwing them onto the cold metal surface one by one with theatrical, malicious energy. A silver laptop slid across the steel, stopping just inches from the edge. A leather portfolio embossed with the gold letters of Vance Neurotech was tossed aside like garbage. Then, a heavy bronze military challenge coin fell from the pocket, bouncing 3 times on the steel with a clear, metallic ring before settling near a box of tissue. Amara's eyes filled with tears as she watched the coin. The very coin her father had carried through the sands of Fallujah, the coin he had held when her mother died, treated like a piece of worthless metal. Finally, Evelyn pulled out a bound 64-page document, her eyes scanning the front cover for any evidence of theft. The title read, Endowment Agreement between the Sarah Vance Memorial Foundation and Sterling Clinic, valued at $15 million. She did not read the words, did not understand the significance, and tossed it back onto the pile with a dismissive wave of her gloved hand. Nothing but corporate junk mail, Evelyn announced, her voice dripping with triumphant malice. But his refusal to cooperate is proof enough of his guilt. Officers, drag him out of this building right now. Elijah Vance stood in the center of the wreckage, his face an unreadable mask of absolute, terrifying calm. His silence was not weakness. It was a physical force, a black hole that slowly began to swallow Evelyn's manicured arrogance whole. He reached out, picked up his bronze challenge coin, and placed it gently back into his pocket. His hand did not tremble. You should have just checked the system, Evelyn. The high-ceilinged atrium of the Sterling Clinic fell into an icy, suffocating silence as the pages of the $15 million endowment contract fluttered onto the marble floor. Evelyn Thorne stood behind the counter, with her chest rising and falling, her fingers still trembling from the adrenaline of her physical assault. She looked down at the scattered papers as if they were nothing more than useless flyers from a local charity drive. She had already won, or so she believed. Elijah Vance did not look at the scattered documents, nor did he look at the crowd of whispery onlookers who had gathered near the glass entrance of the pavilion. He slowly reached into his inner jacket pocket, retrieved his customized titanium-framed smartphone, and tapped the screen with a steady, unhurried thumb. He drafted a single, encrypted message to Catherine Brooks, the chief legal counsel of Vance Neurotech, instructing her to immediately freeze all active research grants and hospital funding linked to the Sterling network. His next message was even shorter, sent directly to Dr. Arthur Pendleton, the chief executive of the clinical board. It was a simple command to descend to the lobby. The trap was sprung. For the next 90 seconds, nobody in the lobby moved, the atmosphere thick with the smell of floor polish and the underlying tension of an impending disaster. Evelyn kept her chin held high, her hand still resting on the stolen leather briefcase as if it were a trophy of her administrative victory. Officer Hayes stood with her arms crossed, her eyes darting between Elijah's unreadable face and the elevator doors at the far end of the hall. She felt a deep, instinctive knot tightening in her stomach. Something was terribly wrong. Suddenly, the executive elevator chimed, the heavy brass doors sliding open with a soft, expensive hum that instantly drew every eye in the room. Dr. Arthur Pendleton stepped out, his tailored charcoal suit slightly wrinkled and his forehead glistening with a thin layer of cold sweat. He held his phone tightly in his right hand, his eyes scanning the lobby with a look of absolute panic that did not match his usual aristocratic composure. Behind him were 3 senior board members, all of them looking equally bewildered and alarmed by the urgent summons. They scanned the room. Evelyn's eyes lit up with immediate relief, her posture instantly shifting from defensive aggression to a sweet, subservient smile. Dr. Pendleton, thank goodness you are here to handle this unfortunate disruption in our VIP wing, she projected, her voice carrying a sweet, nasal quality that made Maya's stomach turn. This gentleman and his daughter attempted to bypass our admission registry using a cloned high-level security card. I had to personally intervene and confiscate their belongings to protect our patients. She waited for praise. Pendleton did not look at Evelyn, nor did he look at the security officers, who were standing by the marble pillars. He walked straight toward the counter, his shoes clicking rapidly against the stone, his eyes locked entirely on the tall midnight black man in the khaki jacket. His face transitioned from pale white to a sickly, ash-gray color within a fraction of a second. He stopped exactly 2 feet from Elijah, his chest heaving as he tried to find his voice. His hands were shaking. Mr. Vance, I had absolutely no idea you were down here, Pendleton whispered, his voice cracking so loudly that the wealthy couple in the corner stood up from their chairs in shock. We were waiting for you in the executive conference room on the 5th floor, and our legal team was just preparing the final signing ceremony for the Sarah Vance Memorial Hall. He swallowed hard. Evelyn's smile did not just fade, it collapsed entirely, her jaw dropping open as her mind struggled to process the name her supervisor had just spoken. Vance. The name was printed on the $15 million endowment document she had just tossed onto the counter like garbage. It was embossed in gold on the leather portfolio she had ripped from the man's shoulder. Her breath caught. Elijah Vance looked at the frantic director, his voice remaining level, devoid of any heat or anger, but carrying a chilling, absolute finality. 3 hours ago, Dr. Pendleton, you shook my hand in your private office and assured me that Sterling Clinic was a sanctuary of progressive medicine and human dignity. You told me that my late wife's legacy would be honored here, that every patient who entered these doors would receive the highest standard of care, regardless of their background. You lied to me. The words fell like lead. Pendleton looked at the scattered items on the counter, his eyes instantly identifying the silver laptop, the military challenge coin, and the signed endowment papers lying next to a box of plastic gloves. He turned to Evelyn, his voice dropping to a dangerous, low hiss that made her entire body shudder. Evelyn, did you touch this man's personal property? Did you search his bag? Evelyn's left eye twitched violently, her fingers clawing at the edge of the marble counter to keep her knees from buckling under the sudden immense weight of the truth. I was only following our VIP verification protocols, Dr. Pendleton, she stammered, her voice losing all of its previous authority and shrinking into a pathetic whine. He did not have a registered appointment, and his attire did not match the profile of our elite patrons. I was only trying to protect the reputation of our clinic. She tried to justify her actions. Maya stepped forward, her voice quiet but piercingly clear in the silent lobby. She did not look at the computer, Dr. Pendleton. She did not check my registration, nor did she verify my residency credentials. She told me that people who look like me belong in the basement loading dock. She called me a parasite. Pendleton closed his eyes, a soft groan of absolute defeat escaping his lips as he realized the $15 million funding, the national prestige of his clinic, and his own administrative career had just been destroyed by 22 years of unchecked bigotry. He opened his eyes, looking directly at Evelyn with a cold, unforgiving glare. You are finished here, Evelyn. The 3 board members stepped forward, their faces grim as they reviewed the scattered documents on the counter, their legal minds already calculating the massive, catastrophic liability of the situation. One of them, a senior legal counsel named Robert Stern, picked up the endowment contract and held it up to Pendleton with a slow, solemn nod of his head. The contract had been physically violated, its pages wrinkled and torn from Evelyn's frantic searching. The evidence was undeniable. Officer Hayes also stepped forward, her hand moving away from her utility belt as she realized the true dynamic of the power struggle in the room. She looked at Evelyn Thorne, the woman who had dominated the administrative staff with an iron fist for over 2 decades, now reduced to a shivering, pale shadow of herself. Hayes felt no pity. She felt justice. Elijah Vance gathered his silver laptop and his leather portfolio, placing them carefully back into his briefcase with slow, deliberate movements that showed absolutely no rush. He did not look at Evelyn, nor did he acknowledge her whispered, panicked apologies that had begun to leak from her trembling lips. He focused entirely on his daughter, adjusting the strap of her backpack with a gentle, fatherly touch. The silence was his armor. Evelyn Thorne frantically adjusted her Akoya pearls, her eyes scanning the growing crowd of onlookers for a single face that might offer her a sympathetic nod or a shred of professional validation. She desperately clung to the metal edge of the reception desk, loudly proclaiming that her actions were entirely in accordance with the clinic's written security bylaws. She pointed a shaking finger at the scattered papers, insisting that she was merely performing her administrative duty to protect the institution from potential legal liabilities. Her defense was a hollow lie. From the back of the silent crowd, a young woman wearing the blue scrubs of a head surgical nurse slowly stepped forward into the bright, buzzing fluorescent lights of the pavilion. Elena Cruz, a 29-year-old clinical supervisor, had worked under Evelyn's direct command for 4 grueling years, enduring silent humiliations every single day. She held a thick, dark manila folder in her hands. Her face hardened with a quiet determination that she had suppressed for far too long. She had seen this happen before. Elena walked straight up to Dr. Pendleton, ignoring the venomous, warning glare that Evelyn tried to burn into her forehead. She opened the folder, revealing 42 typed, dated pages detailing every time Evelyn had manually overridden the VIP scheduling database to push non-white patients into the public waiting area. She spoke with a clear, unwavering voice that echoed off the high marble pillars, describing how wealthy minority families were systematically delayed under the false pretense of routine security audits. Evelyn called it demographic balancing. Before Evelyn could open her mouth to deny the accusations, a second figure emerged from the shadow of the executive elevator bank. Dr. Raymond Cole, a 34-year-old neuroradiologist who had published 3 landmark papers on cerebral blood flow, stood with his hands tucked into the pockets of his pristine white lab coat. He had been passed over for the department head position twice, despite having the highest patient satisfaction scores and the most successful surgical outcomes in the state of Virginia. He looked directly at the trembling director. The administrative shield was cracking. Dr. Cole recounted how Evelyn had repeatedly intercepted his research guests at the reception desk, demanding their passports and academic credentials, while allowing white visitors to pass without a single question. He described the agonizing humiliation of having his private office searched by campus security after Evelyn falsely reported that he had pocketed expensive surgical implants from the main supply room. The investigation had yielded absolutely nothing, but the permanent stain on his professional reputation had remained unaddressed for over 18 months. This was her system. The silence in the pavilion grew heavier as a third witness, a 29-year-old woman named Sophia Al-Jamil, stepped out from the group of patients waiting near the main entrance. Sophia was the CEO of a major regional logistics firm, her family having contributed over $300,000 to the clinic's pediatric wing over the past decade. She recalled the terrifying afternoon her 58-year-old mother was forced to wait in the damp basement corridor during an active hypertensive crisis because her traditional silk headscarf did not align with Evelyn's vision of a modern medical facility. Her mother suffered a minor stroke during that 45-minute delay. Evelyn had blamed the computer. Dr. Pendleton took the manila folder from Elena's hands, his eyes scanning the detailed log entries, the time-stamped security overrides, and the formal patient complaints that had been buried in the administrative archives for years. He felt the immense, crushing weight of a massive civil rights lawsuit settling over his shoulders, a legal disaster that would inevitably destroy the clinic's standing in the medical community. He looked at the board members, who were already taking rapid, panicked notes on their legal pads, their faces grim as they realized the sheer scope of the systemic corruption. The damage was irreversible. Evelyn's breathing became shallow, her knees visibly shaking, as she looked at the 3 victims standing side by side in the center of her polished lobby. The sterile, expensive world she had spent 22 years constructing was dissolving into a sea of documented evidence, legal testimonies, and public outrage. She tried to step backward, but Officer Hayes stood directly behind her, her posture rigid, and her arms crossed over her utility belt. There was no escape. The crowd of onlookers grew larger, with several medical interns and residency students whispering openly about the courage of the nurse and the young doctor, who had finally broken their silence. They pointed their phone cameras directly at Evelyn, capturing every twitch of her eyelids, every bead of sweat breaking through her thick foundation, and every desperate breath she took. The red recording lights of dozens of active devices blinked in unison, acting as silent jurors in a trial that was being broadcast in real time to the entire campus. The truth had escaped. Elijah Vance watched the three witnesses with a deep, solemn respect, his arms still wrapped protectively around Maya's shoulders as she stood tall beside him. He did not need to speak, nor did he need to display his multi-billion-dollar influence to dismantle the woman who had slandered his family. The collective voices of the people Evelyn had spent decades stepping on had become a tidal wave, easily crushing the fragile barrier of her administrative arrogance. Her power was gone. Evelyn Thorne frantically adjusted her Akoya pearls, her eyes scanning the growing crowd of onlookers for a single face that might offer her a sympathetic nod or a shred of professional validation. She desperately clung to the metal edge of the reception desk, loudly proclaiming that her actions were entirely in accordance with the clinic's written security bylaws. She pointed a shaking finger at the scattered papers, insisting that she was merely performing her administrative duty to protect the institution from potential legal liabilities. Her defense was a hollow lie. From the back of the silent crowd, a young woman wearing the blue scrubs of a head surgical nurse slowly stepped forward into the bright, buzzing fluorescent lights of the pavilion. Elena Cruz, a 29-year-old clinical supervisor, had worked under Evelyn's direct command for 4 grueling years, enduring silent humiliations every single day. She held a thick, dark manila folder in her hands, her face hardened with a quiet determination that she had suppressed for far too long. She had seen this happen before. Elena walked straight up to Dr. Pendleton, ignoring the venomous, warning glare that Evelyn tried to burn into her forehead. She opened the folder, revealing 42 typed, dated pages detailing every time Evelyn had manually overridden the VIP scheduling database to push non-white patients into the public waiting area. She spoke with a clear, unwavering voice that echoed off the high marble pillars, describing how wealthy minority families were systematically delayed under the false pretense of routine security audits. Evelyn called it demographic balancing. Before Evelyn could open her mouth to deny the accusations, a second figure emerged from the shadow of the executive elevator bank. Dr. Raymond Cole, a 34-year-old neuroradiologist who had published 3 landmark papers on cerebral blood flow, stood with his hands tucked into the pockets of his pristine white lab coat. He had been passed over for the department head position twice, despite having the highest patient satisfaction scores and the most successful surgical outcomes in the state of Virginia. He looked directly at the trembling director. The administrative shield was cracking. Dr. Cole recounted how Evelyn had repeatedly intercepted his research guests at the reception desk, demanding their passports and academic credentials, while allowing white visitors to pass without a single question. He described the agonizing humiliation of having his private office searched by campus security after Evelyn falsely reported that he had pocketed expensive surgical implants from the main supply room. The investigation had yielded absolutely nothing, but the permanent stain on his professional reputation had remained unaddressed for over 18 months. This was her system. The silence in the pavilion grew heavier as a third witness, a 29-year-old woman named Sophia Al-Jamil, stepped out from the group of patients waiting near the main entrance. Sophia was the CEO of a major regional logistics firm, her family having contributed over $300,000 to the clinic's pediatric wing over the past decade. She recalled the terrifying afternoon her 58-year-old mother was forced to wait in the damp basement corridor during an active hypertensive crisis because her traditional silk headscarf did not align with Evelyn's vision of a modern medical facility. Her mother suffered a minor stroke during that 45-minute delay. Evelyn had blamed the computer. Dr. Pendleton took the manila folder from Elena's hands, his eyes scanning the detailed log entries, the time-stamped security overrides, and the formal patient complaints that had been buried in the administrative archives for years. He felt the immense, crushing weight of a massive civil rights lawsuit settling over his shoulders, a legal disaster that would inevitably destroy the clinic's standing in the medical community. He looked at the board members, who were already taking rapid, panicked notes on their legal pads, their faces grim as they realized the sheer scope of the systemic corruption. The damage was irreversible. Evelyn's breathing became shallow, her knees visibly shaking, as she looked at the three victims standing side by side in the center of her polished lobby. The sterile, expensive world she had spent 22 years constructing was dissolving into a sea of documented evidence, legal testimonies, and public outrage. She tried to step backward, but Officer Hayes stood directly behind her, her posture rigid, and her arms crossed over her utility belt. There was no escape. The crowd of onlookers grew larger, with several medical interns and residency students whispering openly about the courage of the nurse and the young doctor, who had finally broken their silence. They pointed their phone cameras directly at Evelyn, capturing every twitch of her eyelids, every bead of sweat breaking through her thick foundation, and every desperate breath she took. The red recording lights of dozens of active devices blinked in unison, acting as silent jurors in a trial that was being broadcast in real time to the entire campus. The truth had escaped. Elijah Vance watched the three witnesses with a deep, solemn respect, his arms still wrapped protectively around Maya's shoulders as she stood tall beside him. He did not need to speak, nor did he need to display his multi-billion-dollar influence to dismantle the woman who had slandered his family. The collective voices of the people Evelyn had spent decades stepping on had become a tidal wave, easily crushing the fragile barrier of her administrative arrogance. Her power was gone. Dr. Arthur Pendleton walked slowly behind the reception counter, his polished Oxfords crunching slightly on a stray piece of paper that had fallen during the chaotic confrontation. He picked up the ruined $15 million endowment contract with trembling fingers, staring at the torn edges as if looking at the physical wreckage of his own career. The three senior board members stood directly behind him like statues of judgment, their faces grim and devoid of any professional warmth as they calculated the devastating legal liability. The era of unchecked arrogance was officially over. Evelyn Thorne stood frozen as Pendleton turned to face her, his voice dropping to a harsh whisper that traveled clearly across the silent, crowded pavilion. He did not yell, he did not raise his arms, but every single word he uttered carried the crushing weight of a final judicial sentence. He declared that her 22 years of employment at the Sterling Clinic were terminated immediately for gross conduct, violation of civil rights, and physical assault of a key university benefactor. Her career ended in a single breath. Officer Hayes did not wait for Evelyn to protest, stepping forward with a firm grip on the former director's shoulder and guiding her toward the glass exit doors. Evelyn tried to pull away, her expensive Akoya, pearls clicking against her collarbone as she looked around the room for any sign of support from the colleagues she had dominated for decades. Not a single person met her eyes. The medical interns and nurses looking down at the floor or raising their phones to capture her public walk of shame. The sanctuary she built had become her prison. Within 2 hours of her departure, The legal storm of Vance Neurotech descended upon the administration building like a coordinated military strike. Catherine Brooks arrived at the clinic with 4 senior forensic accountants and a federal subpoena, immediately seizing the electronic servers, scheduling logs, and payroll records of the admissions department. They locked down Evelyn's private office, placing official security tape across the mahogany door to prevent any tampering with physical evidence. The deep clean had begun. The forensic team worked through the night, uncovering a massive, systematic network of financial manipulation and racial targeting that Evelyn had operated with absolute impunity. She had manually altered the digital insurance codes of over 80 minority patients, forcing them into higher payment tiers while letting wealthier, white clients bypass copays entirely. She had systematically buried 15 formal complaints from minority staff members, threatening their residency placements if they spoke to the board of directors. Her system of prejudice was documented in black and white. The board of trustees did not attempt to negotiate or protect their reputation, immediately voting to terminate Dr. Arthur Pendleton for systemic negligence and failure to oversee administrative ethics. They released a public, unconditional apology to Maya and Elijah Vance, announcing the total restructuring of the clinic's executive leadership team. The state attorney general launched an official civil rights investigation into the clinic's historical practices, threatening to revoke their federal medical funding if compliance was not met. The foundations of the institution were crumbling. The civil authorities moved with equal speed. Cops from the Richmond Police Department arrived to formally document the physical assault on Elijah Vance, taking detailed statements from the eyewitnesses and securing the video footage captured by the students. Evelyn Thorne's hand-delivered summons to appear in municipal court was processed before the sun had even set over the Virginia state line. Her legal defense would cost her every dollar she had hoarded over her career. The financial repercussions were immediate and devastating for Evelyn personally. The clinic's board of trustees activated the clawback provisions in her executive contract, freezing her $280,000 severance package and canceling her accrued stock options due to the gross violation of moral conduct. Her private bank accounts were flagged as part of the impending civil litigation filed on behalf of the 15 families she had systematically mistreated. She was financially ruined. As the news spread across the campus, a massive student-led rally, organized by Julian and other medical residents, gathered outside the clinic doors, demanding the immediate renaming of the clinical research wing. They held signs bearing the name of Sarah Vance, their voices rising in a unified chant that echoed through the Rossation streets and forced the administration to accelerate their reform plans. The silence of the bystanders had finally been shattered. Elijah Vance watched the demonstration from the third-floor window of the main lobby, his hands resting in the pockets of his khaki jacket, as he listened to the powerful cadence of the young voices below. He felt a deep, quiet peace settling over his chest, knowing that his late wife's name would finally be associated with justice, equality, and cutting-edge healing. He looked at Maya, who smiled back at him with the same resilient, bright eyes that had once belonged to her mother. The legacy of Sarah Vance was secure. 6 months after the storm of litigation and public outrage swept through the Sterling Clinic, the sterile white marble of the pavilion lobby was bathed in the warm, golden light of a late Richmond spring. The towering brass stanchions and velvet ropes that once segregated the wealthy elite from the general public had been permanently removed and melted down to create a commemorative plaque at the entrance. The cold, intimidating security desk, where Evelyn Thorne once sat with her latex gloves, had been replaced with an open, low-profile oak reception area designed to invite conversation rather than project bureaucratic exclusion. Every patient who walked through the front doors was now greeted by name, regardless of the brand of their shoes or the color of their skin. Dignity was no longer a transaction. Dr. Raymond Cole, now officially confirmed as the Chief of Clinical Operations, walked through the lobby with a lightweight digital tablet in hand, his white lab coat open and his posture relaxed. He had spent his first 90 days dismantling the old scheduling algorithms, ensuring that appointment priority was determined solely by clinical urgency rather than the size of a patient's donation. The new administrative system had been audited by an independent third-party firm to guarantee absolute transparency, eliminating the hidden overrides that Evelyn had used to manipulate patient wait times. Under his leadership, the clinic's operational efficiency had actually increased by 14%. Justice and efficiency were not mutually exclusive. Elena Cruz, recently promoted to Director of Nursing Administration, stood near the central courtyard, talking with a group of newly admitted medical residents who were preparing for their clinical rotations. She carried a thick blue binder containing the newly drafted Patient Care Charter, a document that she had personally written to replace Evelyn's outdated and discriminatory security guidelines. She smiled warmly as she handed out the clinical badges, reminding the young doctors that their primary duty was to heal, not to police the hallways. The clinical staff no longer whispered in the shadows. The legal consequences of that fateful Tuesday morning had officially settled over the former leadership, with crushing, irreversible force. Evelyn Thorne's trial in the Richmond Municipal Court had lasted only 4 days, the prosecution presenting 46 separate audio recordings and over 3 years of manipulated scheduling data to the jury. She was convicted on all counts of civil rights violations, unlawful seizure of property, and misdemeanor assault, resulting in a sentence of 24 months of supervised probation, 300 hours of mandatory community service at a public health clinic, and a permanent ban from working in any medical administrative capacity within the state of Virginia. The personal civil judgment of $920,000 had forced her to sell her historic colonial home and liquidate her retirement accounts to pay restitution to the 15 families she had systematically humiliated. Her sterile empire had turned to dust. The University Board of Trustees had finalized the restructured $15 million endowment, directing every single dollar into the construction of the Sarah Vance Neurological Research and Care Center. The new facility featured state-of-the-art diagnostic suites, a community outreach clinic that provided free neurological evaluations to uninsured families, and 30 fully funded annual scholarships for minority medical students. Maya Vance, now wearing a clean white coat with her family name proudly embroidered over her heart, spent her afternoons working in the very laboratory her father had built. She had proven her merit to her peers, earning their respect through her brilliant diagnostics and her unwavering commitment to patient care. She no longer had to hide in the shadows of her father's wealth. The atmosphere inside the dining hall, which had once been a battleground of quiet segregation, was now alive with the vibrant chatter of students from every background imaginable. Colorful student artwork and photographs of medical pioneers of color now lined the walls, replacing the stiff 19th-century oil paintings of the clinic's original, wealthy founders. A large wooden banner hung above the main serving counter, its gold leaf letters carrying a simple, powerful message: every clinic is a sanctuary of life, and every life deserves absolute care. The quiet fear that had once hung over the dining tables like smoke had completely dissipated, replaced by a genuine sense of shared community. The old sorting lines had been permanently erased. Elijah Vance's $5.8 billion company, Vance Neurotech, had officially taken over the facility's primary medical technology contracts, ensuring that every patient at Sterling had access to the most advanced neural implants in the world at zero personal cost. Elijah himself refused to manage the clinic from a distant boardroom, choosing instead to visit the research center every Friday afternoon to meet with the clinical residents and walk the halls with Maya. He did not wear an expensive suit, nor did he travel with an entourage of corporate security guards, still choosing his simple khaki jacket and worn leather boots. He had shown the world that real power does not need to raise its voice or flash its wealth to change a system. True presence is the ultimate weapon against prejudice. The soft, steady hum of the climate control system filled the third-floor research office as the late spring sun dipped completely below the Richmond horizon, casting long, golden shadows across the polished mahogany desk. On the wooden shelf near the window, the heavy bronze military challenge coin rested peacefully next to a beautifully framed photograph of Sarah Vance, laughing on a windy beach in Cape Cod. Elijah Vance watched his 19-year-old daughter carefully pack her leather satchel with laminated diagrams of synaptic pathways, her rhythmic movements carrying the exact same grace and quiet strength her mother had possessed before her sudden departure. Dignity was never a luxury. The Evelyn Thornes of this world do not thrive because they possess genuine, earned power or unmatched intellect, but because the quiet systems around them choose administrative comfort over human conflict. They grow incredibly strong in the silence of the bystanders, in the averted eyes of middle management administrators, and in the quiet compliance of those who value their own status over another human being's basic rights. But when just one individual stands firmly in the doorway and refuses to stay silent, the fragile, arrogant scaffolding of prejudice collapses in a single instant. Courage is a choice. You do not need a $5.8 billion technology corporation or a $15 million endowment contract to defend the inherent worth and honor of a stranger standing in a corridor. All it takes is the willingness to look another human being in the eyes, to step forward into the light, and to speak up in the exact room where the injustice is happening. True presence has the power to heal what systemic cruelty has spent decades breaking, leaving a legacy of belonging that no amount of wealth can ever buy. The silence ends today. So, here is my question for you. If you walked into that clinic pavilion as a stranger and you heard the toxic words Evelyn directed at Maya, what would you do in those first 3 seconds? Would you speak up, step forward, pull out your phone, or would you simply tell yourself it was not your business and walk away? Leave your honest answer in the comments. I read every single one of your thoughts, and if this story touched a real place in your heart, please hit that like button to spread the message of dignity. Share this video with someone who needs to see it, and make sure to subscribe to the channel so you do not miss our next cinematic story. The next Evelyn is already out there waiting in some pristine corridor, looking for someone she believes is too weak to fight back. Who will stand in the doorway?